Good evening, and welcome to the 13th and sadly the last installment of Stories That Need Telling, the life and times of the founder of Naropa Institute, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And this is one to which I've been looking forward to for some time, and we have with us tonight two gentlemen who were involved, you could say, before the beginning of Naropa in many ways, and have come to tell their stories and probably stories about some other people. And this is entitled The Beginning of Naropa, the Story, the Inspiration, the Vision. And just a few words about John Baker and Marvin Casper. They met the Vidyadhara in 1970 and came to Colorado to prepare the ground for him when he moved here from Vermont. They lived with him for about a year and a half in a house up 4 Mile Canyon, during which time they functioned as attendants, major domos, and right-hand men. They helped to found Karmazong, in which they acted as co-directors. They edited together Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism and The Myth of Freedom. They helped establish the first Vajradhatu seminary, and they also helped buy Rocky Mountain Shambhala Center and to start the Naropa Institute. And then it says, each has had a life since then. I doubt that. John taught at the Naropa Institute until 1978, and he started his own business, a travel business, which he still continues to work in, but he recently sold it, and he still continues to work there with his brother Steve Baker. He continues to teach Buddhist and Shambhala traditions. He has a strong interest in group psychoanalysis and is sponsoring Lou Armand to be here in the spring. I've read over the course of time, it's been very helpful to me, many of the things that John wrote in the first few years of his being here, and they still hold very true today, which I'm grateful for. Marvin continues to teach at Naropa Institute, which he has done since the very beginning. He started the Contemplative Psychology Master's Program and was part of the creation of the Transpersonal program here. He has been chair of the BA Psychology Department for many years, and he is well known for his work with the Maitri program. Welcome to both of you, and please tell whatever stories you would like. Thank you. Have you decided which one's going to speak first? Back and forth.
Marvin and I had a very similar history for the first 4 or 5 years of our involvement with Trungpa Rinpoche and the Buddhist Sangha. So much so that I don't know how many of you are familiar with Marcia Yuso, who is head of practice and study at down at the Shambhala Center now, but her little boy at the time, Jesse Yuso, was about 6 when Marvin and I first came out here with the Vidyadhara. Used to refer to us interchangeably as John Marvin. Which is why our early history is so similar. We were very much partners. I thought I'd start by talking about my inspiration for coming out here and doing all this work with Trungpa Rinpoche in the early years, because it really is the inspiration that has illumined my life, and I think illumined the beginning and perhaps the ongoingness of Naropa. When I first met Trungpa Rinpoche in 1970 at Tail of the Tiger, I was looking for some kind of meaningfulness in my life. And Tanya Leontov, who was known as Kaesang in those days, referred to me later as and described me in those days as looking for it with a capital I under every rock and bush. And the thing is that I really didn't know what I was looking for, but I was interested in Eastern religion. And I really didn't think it was going to, something that was going to, a question that was going to be answered by Trungpa Rinpoche, whom I'd met in New York. I thought he was sort of uninteresting, actually. I'd heard him lecture in early 1970. But a friend of mine, I was waiting for a trip to India. I was going to go check out what I'd heard Ram Dass describe. And a friend of mine was up at Karmait Choling and said, why don't you come up here? I had some time to kill before my charter flight left. And he said, it's very nice, and New York was really hot. It was July. And I thought, well, go up there and listen to some Dharma talks. And what happened to me, basically was what happened to a lot of other people, was that I sat down with Trungpa Rinpoche. I had an interview in which he gave me meditation instruction. I wasn't expecting it. And in which he gave me an experience that is described variously in different traditions. In our tradition, it's often called showing the student his own mind, or ear-whispered instructions. In the Japanese tradition, it's called satori. And it was totally unexpected. I felt like I'd been looking out here and it was coming from behind. And in fact, it took me a long time to realize the full import of what he did show me that day as we sat on the porch at Karmait Choling. But it totally changed my life and is something that still illumines my life today and forms the inspiration for me as a human being, makes life worth living. And I think that it's that same quality which is described in so many ways in our tradition that it illumined the inspiration for the founding of Naropa, and still is the bedrock on which it is founded, because that inspiration is an openness of mind. It has to do with no dogma, no concept, and an utter appreciation for life as it presents itself to us every second in the present moment. So I thought I'd start by telling you that, because nothing else makes sense about why we did Naropa unless you start there. Rinpoche was handing out that kind of teaching the way people pass out party favors. I mean, everybody who came to him, who was open and willing to receive it, was receiving it those days. I've heard that Tulku Ujin had a similar style, although I never met him. And I think I'll stop there and let Marvin say something. You want me to keep going? Yeah. Marvin. We came to Colorado, and let's paint the picture of what it was like out here.
Yeah.
All these people were coming. First of all, America was in an incredible amount of turmoil. Intellectually, spiritually, militarily, politically, in every way. Much more so than it is today. I mean, the Vietnam War was in full tilt. The protests were going on. I just, about a year and a half, 2 years prior, been involved in anti-war protests at the University of Chicago. There was every kind of spiritual thing going on. There was all kinds of, Maharaj Ji, the little guru, was here, and people like Rennie Davis as his chief supporter, and Swami Satchidananda was here, and Yogi Bhajan, and a lot of people from the East. And of course Maharaj Ji was the Beatles guru, and then there was the Sat guru, right, the little one, the young kid. And Americans were, Rinpoche used to say, we were all so gullible, he used to say, if I told you to stand on your head 24 hours a day, you'd do it. So when we came out to Colorado at that time, Boulder, was a mecca for hippies. And there were communes all around in this area. And lots of people were coming from the coasts to Boulder as a jumping off point for all these communes. And Trungpa Rinpoche was invited out here by some people at the University of Colorado to teach. And when he got here, that was it. He took one look, and we were in a cabin up in Gold Hill. These hosts thought Tibetan Lama will put him up high in a rustic cabin. Of course, he was wearing handmade, custom-made silk suits, and he'd just come from Oxford. And he took one look out of the window of that cabin at the Continental Divide and a herd of horses around this cabin, and he said, "It's all good." And he stayed.
He said they were cute mountains. Cute little things.
You jump in. I'm racketing on here. Why don't you describe what the milieu that we arrived in here?
Well, I remember actually before we arrived, the first thing he did was to tell us to go out and tell those people about me. And he said, kill the guru trip. And what he meant by that was just prepare them that this person would not be pious looking, would not have robes, would not have anything to do with the image of what they thought a guru should look like or be like. And of course we tried to, but nobody can actually do that, describe what they were going to get. But we told them at least. And then of course he came. And Boulder at that time was a hippie hangout. And so we presented all kinds of, he presented actually the first seminar was the talks that were in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. The first thing he said was, cut through spiritual materialism, because that's all there was around here. There was rampant grasping for spiritual trips, and nobody really knew what they were doing. They just knew that there were a lot of teachers out there from the East, and they had all kinds of things to offer, but nobody had much discrimination. So that was the first thing he said. Learn to discriminate, learn to understand what this is all about. And so that was the beginning.
Well, he used to, he was giving the same kind of meditation instruction that I had received from him, but he was giving it all the time. I remember some people who are now friends of mine, there was a commune called the Pygmy Farm, and they had a house out on Arapahoe, around 75th or so, and they were called the Pygmies. I never quite figured out why, but because some of them were short, but a lot of them were pretty normal. And they scheduled an interview with him. And they made their living by making leather clothes, so some of them were pretty outrageously garbed. And in fact, some of them, like Michael McClellan, I remember, who wasn't married at the time to now Barbara Smith. He later married her, but they divorced. But he looked like something out of one of these prototypical hippie romances. He had long blonde hair and a long blonde beard and these leather clothes with fringe down the side, a big knife sticking down the back. And he just looked like some idealized version. But anyhow, they came and I remember these four guys scheduled an interview. And it was Zonto and Tim Hennigan. And a lot of them had names that had been given them by some New Orleans voodoo witch. And they said names like Zonto and Ragatara and Emer and Nerdy and they have these strange names because they all come up from New Orleans to start this commune. And anyhow, these four guys came in and they all had long beards and long hair and they were wearing leather clothes. And Rinpoche was sitting in bed, which was a mattress on the floor. That's all we could afford when we first moved out here. And somebody had made these tie-dye sheets, which they thought would be a very clever thing to do would be to make them in the Tibetan colors. So they were red and yellow. And he was sitting there in these tie-dye sheets with hardly any clothes on. And these four guys sit down at the end of the bed on the floor, And one of them, I think it was Zanto, who's now Terry Mason, for those of you who know Terry, said, "We're bodhisattvas and we live on East Arapaho." And that gives you the flavor of what it was like out here in those days. And Rinpoche loved the pygmies because many people who came were very needy. People were very neurotic, and there's a lot of suffering, and mental and otherwise, and people were very poor. And the pygmies stood out as people who were in the midst of immense poverty. I mean, they were just sort of happy-go-lucky hippies selling leather clothes down on the mall. Well, it wasn't even a mall then. And they were very generous. And like, they gave us Ludwig and Basha Trzanski and lent us a car, but they needed it back. So the pygmies gave us this car. It was a bright yellow Carmen Ghia. And it was very old, and they were just very generous people, and didn't ask for much. So what can we do rather than what can you give us? And Rinpoche loved them. But there was this quality.
Then what?
Then what? What do you think? I mean, we did so many things in those first years. That was 1970, and we started Karma Dzong, and Rinpoche was always the president of whatever we started. So we were always whatever came next. So since Rinpoche was the director of Karma Dzong, we were the assistant directors. And then when we started Naropa Institute, Rinpoche was the president, so we were the vice presidents. And then, so it went when we had the board of Nalanda. But we started Karma Dzong, and you see, every time people came, Rinpoche would be looking for some way to harness their creative energies to work together on a project. That was always his style from beginning to end. So if people came and they were trying to make money making crafts, as so many hippies were in those days, he encouraged them to start a craft house and live together communally and rent space together. And if people came and they were in the theater tradition, he'd say, well, let's start to do something. So we had the Mudra Theater Conference, where all these heavyweights came from the coasts, and after they left, we wound up starting the Mudra Theater and exercises and so forth. And, one of the things that happened was that a lot of people who came were academics or had teaching experience. And so we began to think about the idea of starting a school as another way of working with these people.
But now we'll get more into Naropa as such. As I was thinking about where it started, where Naropa sort of first sprung up in the midst of all this different activity and projects, I remember a trip to Chicago in I'm not quite sure the year, I think it was 72, which was the first time that I remember ever talking about a Buddhist university. And it was interesting. Rinpoche had given a seminar, and he knew somebody from England who was working at the University of Chicago in the physics department. And so he wanted to see the nuclear reactor. He was very interested in Western science and the power of Western science. And he figured, what would be better than to just hang out with an atomic reactor and get the juice right there? So that's what we arranged to do. We went over to the experimental physics lab at the University of Chicago and hung out next to the reactor, which was housed in this scary room. And you walk in and you see this huge energy source sitting there and all these bars around it. Nobody can get too close to it, and all these white-clad technicians running around. And we just sat ourselves down there, and I don't know what he did, but it seemed like he was just feeling out the scene of what a nuclear reactor feels like energetically. So he didn't say very much about it, but he was there for quite a while. And then we left, and we went back to the host house of where we were staying, sitting around the table, and he started saying, we should do something like this. By this, he meant the University of Chicago, of course. He never thought small, but... And so we started thinking, we started talking about, well, maybe we can build a little campus at RMDC, have buildings like they had at the University of Chicago, which seemed very nice. And so how are we going to start this? Buddhist university? Well, and there was some mention about a summer school. Maybe we could start some summer school. And we kicked around a few names, but it felt early for that. It wasn't quite the energy for it. But I remember that was the first seed, the first time I ever heard from him the idea of doing a Buddhist university or summer school or anything about that had the shades of texture of Naropa. And I don't remember anything happening after that. I think I must have come back and talked to you about it. We kind of kicked it around, but it just felt like it wasn't time to do it. The energy wasn't there, so we dropped it. And the next time I could think of anything happening was in the spring of '73. I don't know what sparked it, but I remember sitting down one day and just saying, well, why don't I play with this and just see if we can do a summer school. And so I started just writing down names of people in the Sangha who could do things. You know, somebody was a physicist, and somebody was a Buddhist studies teacher, and somebody was an artist, and you know, there was Allen Ginsberg, and there was this one and that one, and so I just sort of collected all our little treasures, anybody I could think of, and say, well, let's see if we can do this. So I put it together, and it was very sketchy and just sort of a tentative idea, and went to Rinpoche and said, here, we could do this. We could have a summer school. These people are around. They think it's time to pursue it. And he looked at me, and as was often the case with our projects, he was the guy that said yes or no. And often he didn't say much more than that. You would come to him with something, and this was anybody, you know, with all the different projects. And he would sort of consider it, and there would be a period of silence, and then he'd usually say something like, yeah, it's a good idea, do it. And then you'd be left with, so what do we do next? Well, go do it. So there was a lot of space there for innovation and creativity and so on. So after he said yes, explore it, then I remember talking to John, and then we started to just kick around the idea and sort of flesh it out. And I think we talked to Rinpoche several times.
What I remember was...
before the summer.
Before the summer? See, I
Before
don't
the
remember anything
summer.
until that summer when he said...
Okay, well, I'll
Okay.
lead you up to the summer. Anyway, I think we talked. This is 25 years ago. We were trying to piece together this story. I think we talked.
I remember conversations. You know,
I think we even got a name. I think we even got Naropa Institute.
We did.
Yeah.
And we had conversations continually, I think, about the idea of a Buddhist school, going back a year or two before we actually had that meeting at RMSC.
Yeah,
RMDC.
but when he said yes, then it really got...
Right.
Then we actually sat down and said, okay, what are we going to call this thing? And how are we going to do it and set it up? And
But we still didn't think the timing was right. You know, we hadn't decided to go ahead and do it yet.
No, we just had decided to go ahead and explore doing it.
Right.
Okay.
And then that summer, this is the way I remember it, is that Rinpoche was doing a seminar at what was then Rocky Mountain Dharma Center, and Marvin was up there, and I was down in Boulder manning the fort, and he called me up and he said, "You've got to come up. I think this is the time to start Naropa." And I asked him what he meant, and he said that there were a lot of people up there, and if I were to come up and look and see the collection of people that were available, I'd agree, or words to that effect. So I went up, saw what he was looking at, and there was Jose Arguelles and Jim Green and a whole bunch of other people who were all potential academics and were very inspired, as I had been inspired. Similarly, all these people, I think, came for much the same reason that I came. And so I agreed, and we went to see Rinpoche, and Rinpoche was in this little trailer that Paul Susness had put up there on the land. It was this rust-red trailer, and it wasn't painted that color. And Rinpoche was sitting in a chair, and I can see the scene with him in one of those chrome chairs with the naga hide, kind of like a kitchen chair. And Marvin and I sitting on the floor in front of him, telling him that we thought the time was right, and he said, "Yes, I'm pulling the trigger on Naropa Institute." And he went like this. And that was when we started, and it was just before seminary. That was in maybe August, or July or August, must have been August. And in September, we all went up to Jackson Hole for the first Vajradhatu seminary. And up there is where we had already been writing letters. I mean, I've still got stacks of carbon copies of letters that we sent out to potential faculty that summer and fall. People like Alan Watts and Gregory Bateson and all the people who came. And we continued that all through seminary. And then Jeremy Hayward got rung in about that time. And he and I wrote the first credo, which appeared on the inside cover of that, the first catalog. And Marty Janowitz was down here in Boulder arranging printing and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember, but he was our main contact back in Boulder. Is Marty here? Am I remembering that correctly, Marty, that you were down here and we were up at the seminary?
Yeah, I got a call.
All right. You got a call to help us, or to be the liaison in Boulder? Right. And so we kept working on it through that fall. And then came back and just kept putting it together. We had hoped, my recollection is we were hoping to get 500 people that first summer. We thought we'd have a viable institute. Marvin remembers 300 as our goal. And of course, 2,000 came. Was actually probably something less than that. We had 1,000 each session of 2 sessions, and a lot of people stayed in between, so somewhere probably between 1,000 and 2,000 different individuals were there that summer. But it was just an explosion of much greater than we anticipated. Why don't you tell them what Ram Dass told you?
What did he tell me?
You know.
Yeah.
Marvin and I were both very connected with Ram Dass. He had been my inspiration for becoming interested in Eastern religion altogether. I'd met him in New York in 1969, and then gone up and visited him at his father's estate in New Hampshire, where his father had a 3-hole golf course. And Ram Dass invited all these hippies to come up there and take darshan with him. And he was fond of doing things like staring deeply into your eyes for minutes and minutes and minutes, and then more minutes at a time, and then saying things like, "Well, you look great. How am I?" So I had a strong connection with him. I liked him a lot. He was a very funny guy. Yeah.
I could tell you the Ram Dass story if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Want to hear the Ram Dass story?
Yes.
Or Ram Dass? What happened? Actually, I think didn't we invite Alan Watts first?
We invited Alan Watts for sure, because
Before that.
that was a. Should I tell
Yeah.
that story?
Well, if you want, but
Yeah, go ahead, go do
it's just a
the
the point is, we originally invited Alan Watts and not Ram Dass to the show.
Really?
Yeah, and it was it was only when Alan Watts died that Ram Dass got the bill. Anyway, we wanted Ram Dass to come, and so I went out to the same farm that John was talking about in New Hampshire, and to try to convince him to come. And at that time, Ram Dass was a big deal. He was very popular and plugged into all the psychedelic hippie movement in America. So we thought it would be very helpful to have him to draw people, as well as he's just such an interesting speaker. So I spent the night talking to Ram Dass, and of course Ram Dass had met Rinpoche, and so it was a hard sell, because Ram Dass was very curious what this wild Tibetan yogi was doing, creating a straight school in Colorado. He didn't get it. So, what is he doing? What are you guys really doing? Why are you doing this thing? Shouldn't you be starting an ashram or or a center, or why do a school? And so I started to talk to him about using every form, and Rinpoche liked to use whatever form there was to manifest the teachings, and that it really didn't matter whether it was a conventional form or an ashram, and that basically we were doing the same thing, training bodhisattvas, and it didn't really matter what the form was. But that this form was comfortable for people, so that why not? So after we talked for a while, he said, and what do you want me there for? And we all laughed, and he said, I know why you want me. I'm going to draw people, right? I'm going to be your Pied Piper. So I agreed, yes, that's why we wanted him. And I was cool with him. So he agreed to be our Pied Piper, as he said. And it was a very interesting moment, because he looked around and he said, this very room was the place where Brandeis University got started. My father and his rich Jewish friends got together in this room, 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier, and that was the place where they pulled the trigger on Brandeis University. And there was this kind of magical moment of feeling like, we're the next wave. Now it's not, the Jewish university, it's the Buddhist university. And here are these two Jews sitting there talking about it. Both had become, into Eastern stuff. So it was a very poignant kind of moment there. And so that's the Ram Dass story.
That's a good story. Yeah, I remember I got he went and invited Ram Dass. Ram Dass was really terribly important in my life, and he was both a mentor and a friend. I fretted for him for a while in New York and helped him set up some of his seminars there. And at one point, he had this jag that was in it. He always used it as an example of his attachment. He was Hindu. And he was always talking about his attachment to his jag, and it broke down in New York, and we traded cars at one point. And I was driving around this broken down jag, and he got my souped up Chevy Camaro, which was fun. But just before that, I didn't remember it as being either Alan Watts or Ram Dass. I thought it was going to be both. But Rinpoche had done some seminars with Alan Watts on his houseboat in Sausalito, and that Marvin and I had been along for. And Alan was a very brilliant but problematic person. He was quite a powerful alcoholic, and was drunk a lot of the time. But Rinpoche, liked him very much, and because he was obviously very devoted to Buddhism. And he was very sort of frightened of Rinpoche, I remember, in a way. I mean, whenever they were around together, he was always sort of looking over his shoulder as though he had some hammer was about to come down on him. But I got the job of going out and inviting him, and I went out and visited him in this little cabin on the side of Mount Tamalpais that he had. It was a one-room, sort of hexagonal cabin. It was his Zen retreat, and it was very Zen-y. And he met me at the door, and he was wearing black robes, and we went inside, and we sat down in front of a little shrine on black zafus and gomdens, and I invited him to come to Naropa, and I also invited him to review Rinpoche's book, hoping we could get a review cutting through into the New York Times, and he agreed to do both. And just like Ram Dass, he said, "I know why you want me." I said, "How much would you want to be paid for coming to Naropa?" And he said, "Oh, I'll come for nothing." He said, "I know why you want me." And I said, "I'm willing to do that." I mean, being the draw, because of the name. Although I think, in retrospect, he wouldn't have been nearly as much of a magnet as Ram Dass turned out to be. So,
I just remembered the story.
go ahead.
The Ram Dass story I was supposed to tell, which was...
There are a million of them.
which was that at some point in the spring of this year where Naropa was starting, I get a call from Ram Dass. This was way after we visited with him. He was in the program and so on. And he says, "Marvin, I want to warn you.
Oh, yeah.
The hippies are coming." "You have become it for this summer. Everybody interested in spirituality in America is coming to Boulder to visit you and your Lama. You're it. Be prepared. And you're not just going to get the people that pay, you're going to get the street hippies that are going to be camping on the streets and, with their buses and wandering around and so on. So get ready for them." And of course, this is not what we wanted to hear, because Boulder had just gotten control of its hippie problem and got them off the streets. And we had this image of us bringing back the hippies in the Daily Camera, and Naropa brings back the street people. It was not what we wanted. So we had a hasty conference and wound up renting all of El Dorado Canyon.
No, not all, just the back part. Where you go over the bridge, in the back, for those of you who know El Dorado.
Well, it's a big part of it.
Yeah, it was a big part of it. It was privately owned in those days. It wasn't a state park. And there was quarrying going on, and we rented it from the owner and made it available to anybody who wanted to camp there for free. And the strategy was keep them off the park benches and keep the dope out of the streets of Boulder as much as possible and down at the end of El Dorado Canyon. All the drugs. And it worked. A lot of people went down. There was quite a scene.
So I think that is a good illustration of the improvisation that was needed to do it, because we had no idea what we were getting into. And I think I heard Marty's tape of the extent of our preparations and our plans and so on, which was non-existent. And we just winged it all. And this was just one example, but it went for everything from housing to facilities to staff.
Well, I wouldn't say we completely winged it. I mean, we were out there trying to scrounge up places for people to stay and classrooms, and as we began to realize the magnitude of the enrollment, we were just going crazy trying to find more and more facilities and inviting more teachers, and we were winging it in the sense that we were responding to the influx of applications, people who were saying, "Yeah, I want to come," and I'll tell that story about the Caribbean.
Excuse me, but
what I just told you in the office. I was sitting in my office at 1111 Pearl Street one day.
oh right.
You know,
Okay.
this is where we had our offices, what's now the Boulder Bookstore, up on the second floor. And the phone rang, and what had happened was that Rinpoche, Trungpa Rinpoche, something to understand. For most of us in those years, for many years, we didn't meet any other Tibetan lamas. And if we did, we only met them for a little while. But I mean, I was living with Trungpa Rinpoche. So when we called him Rinpoche, it wasn't the way we call people Rinpoche today, where you're sort of like saying father or Monsignor, and there are lots and lots of Rinpoches. It was his name. Just like, you know, you're Fred and Mary and Steve, you know, he was Rinpoche. So, and it took a long time. In fact, it's only in the last few years that I've begun to sort of refer to him as Trungpa Rinpoche. And in those days, there were people who used to refer to him who had been to the East, and they would come back and they would refer to him as Trungpa. And he used to say, only my enemies call me Trungpa. So anyhow, one of his students, Landy Mallory, had made available a place that his family had in the Caribbean. And Rinpoche and Diana had gone down there in May for a vacation, taking their newborn son, Tagi. Not so newborn. He must have been 2 or 3 or so. And I was actually, dare I say, I was irritated at the idea that he was leaving us in the lurch to deal with this flood of work and going off on a vacation. And one day I'm sitting there in my desk and the phone rings, and it was Rinpoche calling from the Caribbean, from this island, it was Bahamas or something. And he said, how are things going? Or words to that effect. And I said, Rinpoche, I feel like this is a wild animal. It's completely out of control. I'm just trying to hold on to its back. And this squeaky voice that he had comes out of the other end of the phone. He says, you know, my whole life's been like that. I'd never forgotten it. I mean, it was really a teaching for me. I think it's important that we tell you that the inspiration that came out of Rinpoche's... See, Rinpoche was nothing... what he was mainly about was teaching whatever you want to call it, satori, meditation, clear understanding, sanity, he used to call it. And it had to do with open mind, no thought, no concept, appreciating the world as it is without judging it. Giving up materialism, which is the ways in which we try to manipulate our world and our lives to make ourselves happy. And he used to say, you're all babies. It's time to grow up. And that was the spirit that drove Naropa. And if the idea was that we were bringing together all of these people to learn how to do this together, doing our own things. Everyone came, you know, one guy's a carpenter, another guy's a painter, another guy's, you know, David Flint was in there painting the inside of the public service building for 4 days, one of the labors of Hercules, and he was in there with a spray gun and 6 packs of beer, and he slept on the floor, and and spray painted the inside of 10,000 square feet of lecture hall. And then Gregory Corso coming and doing his thing, and that was crazy, and Allen Ginsberg, and all these people. But what was driving it for us and for his students, and I think unwittingly for the people who came with the expecting who knows what Gregory Corso ever expected, but was this inspiration of the ultimate in open-mindedness. It's really the sine qua non of no dogma that Rinpoche was teaching. And it was sanity, appreciation of life. And when people describe all the antics, as so-called, that he performed, it was always in response to us, with our neuroses and our sticking points. And I think he was trying to open us up into that. And that this was another vehicle. It was absolutely, without question, his only real motivation for doing it. He didn't care about the money, he didn't care about the fame, he didn't care about all of that, although they were all fun. More grist for the mill, and he sure loved juice.
When I was listening to some of the other stories, there was a lot of talk about crazy wisdom and Rinpoche being the penetrating troublemaker and so on. And certainly that was there. But what inspired me personally, which I didn't talk about, was not that. That was exciting and interesting, but it was sort of a sideshow, really. What inspired me about Trungpa Rinpoche was his love and his depth. Over and over again, I just felt that when I was living with him, when I was working with him. It was just so constant and so powerful, that depth and that love. And I think that's why Naropa worked to start it, and why people stuck around and worked for practically nothing all the early years. And it was that he was able to personally bond with every one of the hundreds of people that made Naropa happen that first year. We had absolutely no resources in the worldly sense. We had no money, we had no facilities, we had no networks, we had nothing, absolutely nothing, except people who respected him and were inspired by him and loved him. And that's what made it work. The only thing we had was that. And that turned out to be all that we needed. But that's all we had. We had absolutely nothing else. So I just wanted to say that. The other thing that struck me about Rinpoche in terms of projects like Naropa was the spirit in which he did them. He was very bold. I mean, we sort of knew what we were doing, but we didn't really. And it was very much just improvisation all along. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this. This is a few years down the road when I started the contemplative psychology program. I remember sitting in a meeting with Trungpa Rinpoche and the then director of Naropa, Carl Springer, and some other board members. And Carl was very discreetly asking Rinpoche, what the hell is this psychology program? Psychology and Buddhism together? What's going on? Is this cool? Is this really okay? Starting up with all these psychologists? And Rinpoche, who had supported my doing this, looked at him and said, well, we don't know what we're doing, but we do know what we're doing. And we just looked at him, and that was the end of the conversation, of course. And I think you can say the same thing about Naropa as a whole. We didn't know what we were doing in the sense of the details, but we did know what we're doing in the sense of the depth and the sanity that he brought to the whole thing, that he could discriminate what was right and what to say yes to and what to say no to, and it worked. But the plan was very vague, and we just filled in the details as we went along, not only in terms of the facilities and the number of people, but also the programs. I could tell you about how the MA Psych program started. For example, that was our first program, first degree program. Now, it was a very carefully thought out thing, as you'll see. What happened was it was a pure accident, actually. Rinpoche told me there was a Maitri program that he wanted to work with disturbed people. Okay, he built those rooms. Have you seen the rooms? The Maitri rooms? Yeah. These funny colored boxes that he wanted to put highly disturbed people in. That was the plan. Put them in there, and that'll shake up their habitual patterns. If they're stuck, they'll get unstuck. Okay. So there was an attempt to do it, and it kind of petered out. And he asked me, well, go out there and make a program. So I came up with a program that we'd have Naropa students who had just come for that summer and were hot to do something, and these disturbed people and some Sangha people, and we would create a sane community. And this would be a new brand of therapeutic community. And put them in the rooms and see what happened. Okay, so there I went out there, and it was a great idea, except that the disturbed people never came. It didn't work out practically for them to be recruited. So I was there with these Naropa students and Sangha people, and these people weren't in the Sangha that long. The Sangha wasn't that old. And we looked at each other and said, well, so what do we do now? So, well, maybe we should just do this program anyway, see what happens. So I called up Rinpoche and said, well, what do you think? We can just, there are no disturbed people here. Maybe, what about doing this anyway? Just with the people here, we'll just do a program, like a Dharma program. He said, good idea, do it. So there we did, for 4 months, we did this Maitri program. We sat in the rooms and, formed a community and interacted with each other. Okay. And it was a very powerful experience. And everybody was very excited about it. And I remember going up to Kamachuling, and it was after the program, and meeting with Rinpoche, and he said, so what happened? And I told him about my experience, I told him about everybody's experience, and he just sat there completely silent for however long I went on about the program. And then he looked at me, he smiled, he went over to the tape recorder, the stereo, and he put on this Mozart piece that he loved, this very celebratory Mozart piece. He sat down, he just said, it worked. And we listened to Mozart, and that was it. It worked. You have to realize nobody had ever done these in that context. So, that was the first accident that created the Master's program. We still didn't have a program, we just had this Maitri thing. So at the time, there were people from Naropa in this program who wanted to do a Master's program. And they were going to go to Antioch and do their, out of residence, something or other that Antioch had started. So I got this idea, wait a minute, why go to Antioch? You want to do Maitri, you want to study Buddhism? We'll do it. Come to the summer school. We'll create a master's program for you. We could do just what Antioch does. You want to study with us anyway. So I came back and proposed it to the gang who was running Naropa at the time, and Rinpoche, and he said, why not? So that was the beginning of the master's program. We offered a master's program based on the summer school. That was just summer school. They would go to the summer school, we'd bring in therapists from around the country, and we'd teach them Buddhism, and we'd experiment and see how it all worked. and send them off to Maitri and send them into an internship, and that was it. So basically the master's program was just purely an accident based on, Maitri going its way and these people being there, and that was it. That was our first degree program. So that could suggest the level of intensive planning that we did. And the BA program, I wasn't around to work on it, but maybe you could say something about why you I assume it was because there were some teachers around who wanted to do it.
BA program?
Yeah.
Oh, it just seemed like the natural thing to start moving towards
Yeah.
in 1975. But I was actually thinking I'd like to build on that point about Trungpa Rinpoche, that he was always encouraging us to, as he put it, take a leap. Remember? I'm going to see Marty nodding, because there's a story I'm going to tell about you. When Marty first came, and a bunch of other people, they were making their livings doing crafts. And they got together and rented a house over on Pine Street, which was called the Craft House. And they were doing their crafts in the house. And somebody got the idea that, well, let's get a studio and we'll share the rent. And it was over on 14th Street, near where Art Cleaners is today. And I think Art Cleaners was there then. And anyhow, the idea was they were going to rent this studio. It was up on the second floor above a gym. And we had a meeting at the craft house. And at this meeting, we found out what the rent was, and everybody started saying, oh, we can't afford that. We'll never be able to generate enough money. And Rinpoche kept saying, take a leap, And people saying, oh, Rinpoche, we won't be able to afford the rent. We've got to sign a lease, and went back and forth. And finally, he was just like a Jewish mother. He started saying, okay, don't take a leap. I'll love you anyway. You remember that? Marty saying, yeah. And we all went, it's Mom, okay, we'll take the leap. And we did. But it was always like that, always. I mean, he was constantly making us stretch. I mean, the first few years of running Naropa, we were rolling over debt like you never saw. I mean, God, we were just constantly borrowing money from friends and anybody that give us any money, and it was always short-term loans, and so we'd be rolling it over, borrowing more money to pay off the last debt. It was just nuts. I mean, it was like a steamroller behind you, you're walking along and things nipping at your heels, and he was always just happy to keep pushing it like that. We were always, the whole style from beginning to end of both the Buddhist and the Moana style was completely financially overextended. You're sort of leaning out over the edge of a pool that has no water in it. Or so it felt, anyhow. But a couple other points that I wanted to make about Naropa, just to get them on the record, because I think they're important ones. Perhaps you've seen, some of you, the opening of Naropa, that tape of the opening. When we first started it, I mean, Marvin and I and other people, everybody had the idea that, well, we're Westerners, but we're interested in Eastern religion, and we'll get Eastern disciplines and Western disciplines together, and they'll have this sort of East-West Studies Center, and we'll get a, cooperation and participation and inspiration between the two, and everything will sort of be sweet and lovey, and, we'll have common inspiration and develop some common themes and goals. Rinpoche gave a talk at that opening in which he said, we're making hot chili. And he wanted these traditions to come together and maintain their integrity and their distinctness and strike sparks of inspiration as they came together and clashed. He was not about creating some kind of peaceful amalgam or like a soup where everything gets sort of blended together into one taste, but rather sparks, explosions, hot chili, he said. I think that was an important theme for him. He loved conflict, and he kind of really disliked it when people sort of papered it over with some kind of conceptual, nice philosophy. But he wanted people to really sort of be who they were. before that, one more thing. I wanted to say this last thing about the Heart Sutra thing,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I thought that was a good one. Over the years, I've thought about how all this happened. And whenever these projects took place, Rinpoche's students made them happen. But it was very much, and Rinpoche did relatively little. He didn't do the grunt work and even a lot of the planning and scheming. But he provided the inspiration behind it, and we always went to him and checked it out with him. And I've often thought that really what was happening, it was just like in the Heart Sutra, where the Buddha says almost nothing. He goes into the samadhi that expresses the Dharma. I think Rinpoche was in that samadhi all the time. And then his students, Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra, are inspired to talk about the teachings. And that's the way all these projects happened. Whether it was Naropa or Maitri or RMSC or all the things that took place up in the project up in Nova Scotia, all of that, the Shambhala teachings, they all took place as students were inspired by that fundamental inspiration that he gave us of meditation and sanity. And he would sit back there saying, "Good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is," and push us on.
Yeah. Maybe we should open it for some questions at this point. Yes.
Can you say a little bit about the choice of name? So you knew how that came about.
Can you repeat his question?
The question was how the name Naropa Institute came about.
I don't remember it as being, a big deal. It was, Nalanda University. We knew about Nalanda, and I think Rinpoche picked it, Naropa, and Marvin and I probably. If it was me, I would have picked Nalanda. Would have made sense. But Rinpoche picked Naropa, as I recall. But
Yeah. Yeah, we kicked it around. We were thinking Nalanda, and Naropa is. Obviously, he was the scholar of the Kagyu tradition. He was the head of Nalanda. So I think Rinpoche was thinking very much of Nalanda as a sort of a model in his head. But Nalanda, I think the feeling was it was a little pretentious to call it Nalanda.
that's right.
At the time, because that was this massive university in India with thousands of students, and it went on for hundreds of years, and obviously we were just doing a little thingy at first. So I think we felt that Nalanda was too much. And I think the idea of the institute was the same thing. We started with a summer school. We didn't start with a degree programs. And the idea was to sort of build from that. So it felt like the institute was a better word than university or college, because we really didn't have that at the time. It was sort of an aspiration rather than a reality. So I think Naropa Institute was sort of a modest statement of what really was, in his mind, Nalanda University.
And he always...
But he didn't want to say that.
But he did describe Nalanda University as being host to many conflicting, or competitive religious traditions, and that was sort of the Buddhist style because of the lack of dogma, the emphasis on no dogma and open-mindedness. That a Buddhist university could host all these different traditions, and Nalanda was the model for that. Yes.
I have a question about the Maitri rooms, how they came about, what was, is there something, an existing model? Can you say something about the Maitri rooms?
I'll have to do that. How they came about.
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, how did the Maitri rooms come about? Was there some model, and so on? There was some sort of precedence in Buddhist practice and teaching, but basically he made them up.
There was one thing more to say about it, though. The whole idea of working with mentally disturbed people came from really from Suzuki Roshi. I mean, we had the idea because there were so many psychologists and psychiatrists showing up here as well. And but what happened was that Roshi, being located in San Francisco, Rinpoche always felt it was a mistake for a teacher to be located in the city, because the degree of suffering and confusion in the cities was so intense that people were very demanding and needy. And he said it forced the teacher, you couldn't deal with it. It just simply would come at the teacher too fast, so it forced you to put up walls around you, around the teacher, to create a kind of fortress so that you could let people filter through and deal with them in an effective way. And he said that he picked Boulder in part because by the time people got here, it was so spacious, and it was an automatic filtering process, and that it was easier to deal with people when all this space, and help them get sane. In any event, Roshi was having a lot of difficulty at the Zen Center with people who were too disturbed to be able to effectively help them in the context of the Zen Center. And he spoke to Trungpa Rinpoche about the idea of somehow working with these kinds of people who were really, on the edge in one way or the other, and were very mentally disturbed. And a lot of the inspiration for, what eventually became the Maitri Project, which was started out, I think, where was it, in Pennsylvania, and then moved to upstate New York, came from Roshi and then Rinpoche, them collaborating on it, and we put that project together. Suzuki Roshi was someone whom Trungpa Rinpoche loved intensely, and he felt that he was the only other, when he first came here in those early years, the only other real powerful Buddhist teacher in North America. And when he died, Rinpoche said, "I've lost my only friend in North America." They loved each other a lot. Lots of stories there. Yes?
How were you able to get the building, your first building?
We had all these registrations, and we got lucky. There was a fellow in town named John Moritz. He's still around. You know John? Lovely guy. And he was working for what was then National State Bank. It's that bank that's on the corner of 13th and the Mall, that nice stone bank. And he was working for the president of that bank, and they, for some reason, had control of the what were called the varsity townhouses and the university townhouse, and these group of townhouses up on the hill.
Boulder Townhouse Company was called.
That's it. And I went to him and sat down with him and said, "We want to rent them all." He said, "Great." It was amazing. I mean, on a lick and a promise. And he rented in Naropa all these townhouses, which were a godsend because it was where we put a lot of the students. And how we got the rest of it, I can't remember. I think Marty was, very involved with all the facilities, and later Tom Hast. I don't remember that very well.
We just contacted any realtor we could find, and we rented anything that was available. Every sorority and fraternity on the hill we rented that first summer.
Right.
And then we stumbled onto whatever the building was on Broadway, I got the address. And we moved, remember, the week before we opened?
Did we move up there then?
Yep.
Up on Grandview.
Grandview and Broadway.
Grandview and Broadway, the corner of Grandview and Broadway, yeah. Yeah, we got the public service building, which was derelict at that time. It had been a garage, that main hall for public service trucks. and it had been standing empty for a few years, and we managed to rent it from the public service company. Went in there, David Flint single-handedly painted the whole thing inside. Huh?
The striped carpet.
That striped carpet, we bought that really cheap striped carpet and rolled it out, and it was quite a scene. I remember the dance there in between sessions that first time with Dusty Drapes and the Dusters. We had a couple thousand people, dancing to country rock, and afterwards, Loudon Wainwright, do you know who he is? Yeah. After the dance, after Dusty Drapes ended, Loudon Wainwright and a friend of my brother's named George Gerdes performed. They got up on stage and performed. Loudon Wainwright is a songwriter, and so is George. But Loudon Wainwright's famous. He comes and plays at the Boulder Theater. His biggest hit was called Dead Skunk in the Middle of the Road. But he's a very funny guy. And he sang this song that I've always loved. I heard it endlessly after that because Polly Monner, now Wellenbach, became Loudon's girlfriend. And when we were working up in the top floor of Naropa Institute, she used to play Loudon's records over and over again. And but anyway, there's this song that went roughly like this, that he sang. It said, down in Southern California, there's a guru who's a guru in there. He's got 50 million followers, and they're following him everywhere. And it went on. It was very appropriate between sessions, because there was we had the dueling gurus, Ram Dass and Rinpoche, packing the hall on alternate nights that first summer.
Anything else? I remembered something about the facilities, by the way. It illustrates the level of inspiration that Naropa generated all over the place. I remember that facilities thing because there was one catch to that Boulder townhouse company. They wanted a lot of money up front to give us all those apartments, and we didn't have it. So I got a call. Do you happen to know anybody that has $15,000 that we could put down on these places, because otherwise we can't secure them? They weren't going to just give it to us. So we didn't. We had nobody in the Sangha who had that $15,000, and there were all these houses, nothing to do with. But somebody in California knew somebody who had a trust fund, who had no connection to the Sangha, never met Rinpoche, but she liked the idea of doing something with her money. So we went to California, and we had to convince her that she'd get her money back. Which was not an easy thing to do. But somehow we convinced her to loan us the money, and that's how we got all the housing.
Did she get her money back?
Yes, she did. Because the deal I made with her was we gave her the first $15,000 that came in the door. That's the only way she would do it. So if we went bankrupt in 3 weeks, she would get her $15,000. So, but yet, she was willing to do that. It was still an outrageously generous thing to do for someone who had no connection to us, but just was inspired by the idea of it and the energy of it. It was so positive and so exuberant that she just got carried away and said, here's my trust fund. That was it. So that was the kind of spirit that the whole thing ran on. And as we were talking, I realized that not only was it love and inspiration, but what Rinpoche was able to do is to generate a confidence and an exuberance in everybody who was involved with that project, that even though it seemed totally, from a business logic point of view, an absurd thing to do, yet we all just went ahead and had the courage and confidence that somehow we were going to make this work. And it was contagious. And we were able to, people picked up on it, and they believed it. And that is why it worked. And they all came because they actually believed that we would be there, which was a leap of faith. That there would be somebody there and there would be facilities and all those things. But he had that ability. As John was talking about, being in that place of inspiring Shariputra Avalokiteshvara, he had that ability to inspire a confidence that you could do it. And he brought out in people the best in them. He brought out things in them that they didn't know they had, talents that they didn't know they can do, and stretched them beyond what they thought was possible. And you could see it over and over again. And Naropa was just one example of that. He would empower teachers to go out and teach the Dharma after they had just mastered the basics, because he sensed in them something that they could do it. And most of the time they did. And when they didn't, he was willing to take the risk of them falling on their faces. He was willing to fail. And that was the other thing. It was this feeling like, well, it might not work, but so what? That was the sense that at the end of the day, we had a good fight and we tried hard with it and we did our best, and if the whole thing blows up in our face, we'll just laugh and go on. That was the feeling. It reminded me, I don't know if you've ever seen this picture, Zorba the Greek. There's a scene there in which they try to build a ramp down a mountain, and the whole thing completely falls apart, and the guy who did it was very upset, and Zorba just comes up to him and says, well, it was a good laugh anyway, and it was a great adventure, and let's dance. Let's dance. And that was the spirit. If the whole thing fell on its face, I could just see Trungpa saying, well, what's next? And so with that kind of spirit, that warriorship, and that confidence, we just launched. And it worked. To our amazement, it worked. So, I just wanted to share that.
Marvin's going to say something. Is it all right? Yeah. Thank you both very, very much. We thought we'd close the evening with a reading and then some thank yous. Do you want to say something about, these are readings sent to us when we asked Dr. Ed Pogval to contribute to the stories that need telling. He sent us a short story of his experience with Trungpa Rinpoche and 2 poems. And we'd like to, I think they're very appropriate to close the series with. Marvin, would you like to say something about Dr. Ed?
Dr. Ed. Dr. Ed came here in, I think it was 77. He was a distinguished psychiatrist, and we asked him to take over this contemplative psychotherapy master's program that I talked about starting. And he accepted in the spirit in which I was just describing, because it was still very much in its experimental phases. And he took it on and shaped it for many years and guided it through many evolutions. And I don't remember exactly when he stopped. Does anybody remember what year he stopped doing that?
1990.
Yeah, 90.
1990. So he did it from 77 to 1990 and really made it into something very special and powerful. And then at some point, I don't remember exactly when, he got inspired to do a 3-year retreat. And he went off and did a 3-year retreat, and he liked it so much that he never came back. Roughly speaking. He came back for a little while. But now he's in a lifelong retreat. And so this is coming out of that retreat.
This is entitled Lotus Feet. Shabdo is a Tibetan term for someone who is a kind of personal attendant to a teacher. When Trungpa Rinpoche went through a long period of illness in 1981, I became one of a group of 7 Shabdus formed to assist in caring for him and his environment. We each spent a whole day each week doing what was needed to augment the service already being given by his Kasung. On my first day on the job, I was in Rinpoche's sitting room, along with himself and one of the Nalanda directors. They were sitting in chairs, and I was kneeling, sitting on my heels on the carpet in attendance posture, feeling awkward, uncertain what to do other than just be available. But an even greater discomfort was the unfamiliar formality of Trungpa Rinpoche's meticulous world. In it was a degree of precision which made me feel a peculiar tension of hypervigilance. Only an hour before, I had been sitting outside when the door to his room quickly opened and shut as someone entered. In that brief moment, about 20 feet away, I glimpsed Trungpa Rinpoche for the first time that day. Later, someone who was leaving the room told me that Rinpoche said that the little Shambhala flag pin I was wearing on the lapel of my suit jacket should be turned around. When I noticed that other people were not as anxious as myself, I began to realize that I needed to learn how to relax in the midst of such precision. The Nalanda director then asked Rinpoche, "Sir, what exactly is a Shabdu? What does it mean?" Rinpoche said, "Shabdu traditionally takes care of the teacher in a very basic bodily level." The director said, "Like, does the Shabdu help you get dressed?" "Oh no," said Rinpoche. "That's too much for the Shabdu. He is the lowest of the low." The next week that I was there, again in the sitting room, Rinpoche was having a morning meeting with 2 other directors. He was wearing a beautiful white linen suit, dark blue suspenders, and dark pinstripe trousers. He was wearing a beautiful white linen shirt, dark blue suspenders, and dark pinstripe trousers, but had on no socks or shoes. They had started their discussion about something or other, and Rinpoche asked me to bring his socks and shoes from the adjoining bedroom, and then motioned that I should put them on while they continued to talk. Kneeling in front of his naked feet, I was struck by how different they were from ordinary feet. They were quite delicately shaped, with high arches, like a dancer's feet. The skin was clear, but had a surprisingly blue-greenish color, almost translucent. There were a couple of small surgical scars on the top of the left foot, which I imagined were to relieve the contractures caused by his partial paralysis. The discussion went on above me, distant, muted. I wanted to do something, but I kept thinking how anyone in ancient India, from royalty to beggars, would have seized a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to place the naked feet of a Siddha to the top of his head. Just then I felt his warmth as he leaned over towards my face, looked over the top of his glasses, and in a half-whisper said, "Do you have any children?" That did it. I was in gear. I telescoped the socks, then took each foot in turn by the ankle, rested it on my knee, and in a fluid motion put on each sock while smoothing out any wrinkles to avoid pressure points. I did it as easily as I'd put on the socks and shoes of my daughter, getting her ready for kindergarten as she sat eating her cereal while looking at the pictures on the cornflakes box. Then came his shoes, those quaint shoes which could have been tooled in the back streets of Lhasa or maybe Savile Row. More like boots with all those eyelets and hooks, covering the ankle to give him full support. I laced the shoes easily, using the fingers of my left hand to adjust the tension where the lacing crossed, not to be too tight or too loose. Tied them, and then adjusted the cuffs of his trousers over the boot tops. While they were still in discussion, I looked around the room to see if there was anything more for me to do. Then I got up and went to the door, turned briefly to bow to Rinpoche, and quietly clicked the door closed. Clean job. Vajra world. Michelle.
Written the 10th of April, 1999. Loyalty. Olive-skinned, blue curls jump at her shoulders, like everything else jumps to her arrogance. From where does her authority come? What sword blade protects her? She does not respect you. She insults you in public, calling out, hurry up, to a lazy pack mule. Stings to keep you moving, I suppose. Fury clears your mind, she says. In exasperation, she holds a mirror to your face, and finally you see the relentless precision of her called no more youth. Is there anyone who loves you more than this great heroine, who tells you, don't waste time, no time to lose, don't hold on, jettison your baggage, free fall, travel light like the wind, like the sky in the sky. Perfume. Don't become dull. Don't get stuck, longing to peace and calmness, secretly flinching from emotions, turning away from pandemonium. Be confident, instant to instant, natural clarity of mind can take whatever comes. When a bold Tibetan woman with bloodshot eyes and smelling from alcohol puts her hands on your shoulders, looks you full in the face, her expression claiming equality in love and war, know her to be the one called immovable continuity of discipline.
So thank you all. See where to start. I think the best place to start, when we had the idea to start this series, which was largely a dream that I've had of doing ever since I got to Naropa, and it coincident with the 25th anniversary, it seemed a timely thing to do. And as with all good ideas, if the right person doesn't come along at the right time to make it manifest, it doesn't happen. And I want to thank Michelle Durham for having appeared out of the East, coming from Japan, and having some space in her life and being willing to really have the courage to leap into the situation, which was extremely unformed. And I thought that I'd pay her some tribute by reading names of the faculty that she, and with a little help from me, have lured into this to create this environment of telling stories around the life of this remarkable man and how it has impacted this place greatly. Ringu Tulku Rinpoche, Barbara Dilley, Martin Janowitz, Judy Leaf, Ernest Porps, Ann Waldman, Janina Jobson, Steve Chlorfine, Reed Bai, the Venerable Trangu Rinpoche, Sakyong Mipam Rinpoche, Geleg Rinpoche, Koben Chino Roshi, with help from Shibata Sensei, Fran Lewis, and Marty Moscow, Peter Goldfarb, with assistance from Ashley Playfair, Carol Crutchlow, and Kevin Causey, Lady Diana Mukpo, Judith Zimmerbrown, Fleet Mall, Victoria Howard, Karen Kissel-Wagela, Kathy Emery, Roger Doris, and John Baker, and Marvin Casper. And I thank all of those people who have contributed, and I especially thank Michelle for her ability to work with them and to create an environment that really spoke in nonverbal ways about Trungpa Rinpoche's world. So thank you very much, and I have a little present for you. Somewhere. Please. You have to have this on videotape, Joe. Thank you so much. Where's Marissa? Do you want to do this with me? In the back room, and the infrastructure of this thing is Marissa Tiroli, who has been with us on all of these 13 things, providing hosting and schlepping and helping out in every conceivable way. And we want to thank you very much. And we likewise have a small gift for you. Thank you.
You made it happen.
And last but not least, every one of these has been faithfully videoed by the same person. And if you would, Joe, would you step from behind the camera and take a bow? And thank you ever so much for... you have to take a bow in front of the camera. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Yeah. So thank you all. There's a reception outside, and please stay around.